Thank you very much for letting me submit my paper via recorded video. The title of my paper, Her Wings in Motion, The Vampire Dance. The image on screen now, Albert Peynaud, circa 1890. I should like to begin with three quotations. True it was, the candle wagged to and fro, and his shadow danced upon the wall. John Malcolm Rymer, Barney the Vampire, 1847. The flicker of an expiring candle makes the shadow of a bedpost dance upon the wall, nearer to our faces. J. Sheridan Le Fanu, Carmilla, 1872. Bleeding hearts and dry bones of the churchyard, and tears that burn as they fall, all dance together to the music that he make with that smileless mouth. Bram Stoker, Dracula, 1897. In 1905, Pathé Frère released a moving picture entitled Loie Fuller. The director is unknown, although it seems that Segundo de Chaumont oversaw its hand coloring. This French-made film showcased Loie Fuller, the American artist who helped pioneer modern dance. Writing about Fuller's work, Linda Need comments that, quote, astronomy, illumination, cinematography, and the gendered allegorical body had come together finally in the figure of Loie Fuller. Fuller invented the serpentine dance in 1892 for a New York play about hypnotism, although the dance achieved its greatest fame soon thereafter at the Folies Bergère. Tom Gunning describes Fuller's dances as, quote, visual pyrotechnics created by colored and sharply focused electric light and shadows, using the swirling surface of Fuller's fabric as a screen for the projection of an equally protean succession of colors, end quote. Fuller was both the project and the projected. The result was an ethereal, otherworldly performance. In the film Loie Fuller, a large bat flies onto the terrace of a country home, or perhaps even a castle, as we do not see its exterior. A clever transition occurs in which Fuller appears for a moment with a bat on her head. When the bat disappears, Fuller spreads her costume in batwing style, her feet balanced on the terrace ledge. With the bat to woman transformation complete, Fuller steps down to the terrace, performs her dance, and then dematerializes thanks to a dissolve, another cinematic sign of her apparent supernaturalism. I'd like to please show the complete film, Loie Fuller, from 1905. Loie Fuller probably represents the first appearance of a supernatural vampire in the cinema. Elsewhere in my published work, I've talked about why Méliès's Le Manoir du Diable doesn't really qualify as a vampire film. Certainly, Loie Fuller represents the first vampire dance on the screen. That vampires would dance need not be surprising. The use of dance to convey horror in verse dates to at least the 14th century, and in artwork to at least the 15th century. with the danse macabre depicted by artists for the next half millennia, from the woodcuts of Hans Holbein to the music of Camille Saint-Saëns to the animation of Walt Disney's The Skeleton Dance 1929 to the cinema of Ingmar Bergman's The Seventh Seal 1957. If the dead can dance, why not the undead? And so they did. The shadows opened their wings and danced to and fro, first in the fin de siècle, and then with greater force during the first decade of the 20th century. Dancing with such dreadful pleasures as to become a cultural phenomenon. As early as 1890, the famous High Henry minstrels presented the grand vampire transformation dance in America. Whether its transformation involved a bat is unknown, but it is clear that other vampire dances soon followed. Nellie Navette first performed her vampire dance in London in December 1892. In it, she costumed as a bat. Then in Springfield, Massachusetts in 1896, women at a variety show performed a vampire dance by wearing, quote, black gowns with loose skirts, which were ornamented by gilt stars and spangles, end quote. Predating Bram Stoker's Dracula, these dances did intend to invoke the supernatural creature. Vampire dances became popular again in 1909, but these later performances were also inspired by Philip Burne-Jones, his painting The Vampire from 1897, of course, inspired also by Rudyard Kipling, and perhaps most specifically, Porter Emerson Brown's Broadway play A Fool There Was, based upon Burne-Jones and Kipling, of course, which brought increased attention to the, quote, vamp. Bert French and Alice Eyes premiered their vampire dance in July 1909. It was accompanied by tarantella music. French explained, with Miss Eyes, I had been performing the Apache dance, and I was anxious to find some artistic and unconventional dance to follow it. I wanted something totally unlike anything which had been done before. Inquiry, study, and thought had provided me with several ideas, but none that wholly pleased me. Then one morning I received from a friend a hurried note scribbled upon a picture postcard. That card bore a reproduction of the famous Burne-Jones painting The Vampire and Kipling's verses, A Fool There Was. In a flash, I saw that this was what I wanted. Here was the vampire dance, and with Miss Eyes, I began the invention of a pantomime drama. During the dance, Eyes appeared in a cloth of gold that, quote, concealed little of her womanly charms. One photograph shows her holding out her cape in bat-like fashion. She was, quote, wild-eyed, and the dance, quote, calculated to make viewers gasp. A San Francisco critic noted that an audience even, quote, shuddered while they applauded. French and Eyes' vampire dance was successful, enough so that they performed it in England. Despite their overt homage to Burne-Jones and Kipling, the London Morning Post remarked, quote, it is, in fact, rather more reminiscent of Mr. Bram Stoker's novel Dracula. That response may have been prompted by the dance's climax, in which Eyes, quote, deliberately stooped down, vampire-like, and gnawed his throat, sucking his life blood, end quote. Joseph C. Smith developed a different vampire dance in 1909, which Vera Macarena and later Violet Dale and Eulalie Jansen performed in a musical comedy called The Flirting Princess. In it, the vampire and victim appeared on a, quote, darkened stage with a black background, green spotlights, and bars of red light coming from the depths understage. The male dancer wore black. The vampire wore a, quote, greenish, snake-like clinging gown. Funeral music accompanied the allegedly startling performance. At the climax, the vampire smiled wickedly and, quote, sucked the blood from the throat of her victim, end quote. More than French and Eyes, Smith's dance merged the supernatural vampire with the vamp, so much so that one review in 1911 argued it would be, quote, vastly improved by the omission of the inexcusable and revolting ghoulishness of the final tableau. Tom Terrace and Mildred Deverez created yet another vampire dance in 1909. An article in the San Francisco Examiner described their act as follows, quote, "This new dance can hardly fail to conjure up nightmare visions of that clawed winged beast resembling a monstrous bat which was supposed to fasten its fangs in the throat and drink the blood of living infants, even of adult human beings." More and more of late, in literature and in artworks, the alleged vampire attributes of womankind has been accentuated. Novelists, poets, and playwrights are picturing her in colors as vivid and unmistakable as those of the classic succubus, perhaps in modern times most startlingly portrayed by Balzac in his tale with that title. The lady of the vampire dance appears to claim a more literal right to the title. She is after the real life blood of her victim and gets it. Thus far, the deed is accomplished in virtually the same general series of poses and pantomimic expressions of the vampire and her victim. To sound the note of tragedy at the start, she is a typical siren, fair, daring, alluring, exhaling power and assurance, while he is an innocent, ingenious youth with all the illusions of inexperience. The stage effects of scenery and management of lights are important and are cunningly utilized to emphasize the meaning of the pantomime. When a curtain rises on a dark scene with flashes of lightning revealing what looks suspiciously like a churchyard with graves, the vampire, in a voluminous but semi-transparent robe, is seen prowling about. You realize with shudders of anticipation that, while haunting the last resting place of her hapless victims, she feels the need of fresh prey. A change of scene shows her on the scent of a new victim. She creeps stealthily into the studio of a young artist, a youth romantic and innocent. She has cast off her robe and is in the habiliments of a typical siren, her long, abundant hair falling over bare bust and arms, a loose diaphanous gown hardly concealing her body and lower limbs. A smile of unholy joy lights her face. But the innocent young artist sees in her only an ideally beautiful creature to be wooed and won. She is Kipling's, quote, "rag and a bone and a hank of hair." The innocent does not suspect that he is doomed. The vampire begins her dance of death, but sees in it only more powerful appeals to his senses. Toying with her victim, she pretends to be timid. She eludes him. She pretends to have no further power of resistance. The vampire has him completely enthralled. That's the end of the admittedly long quote. At the end of the dance, Deverez's vampire, quote, "draws his lifeblood from the throat, then rises and glories in her triumph over the death of her victim," end quote. Based upon this description, the Terrace and Deverez vampire dance seems to have merged the vamp and the supernatural vampire, with the supernatural element being by far the more dominant of the two. The success of these dances on stage led to such films as August Blom's The Vampire Dancer, Nordisk in 1912. The film was salacious enough to be banned in San Francisco. It features a man stumbling into a vamp's lair. She examines him with undisguised lust. He is wary of her. Their movements are slow and sexualized, the vamp first caressing and then gripping his body. The dance culminates with the vamp strangling her partner, smiling wickedly, and even kissing him as she does. Equally notable was The Vampire, Calum, 1913. A synopsis in the Calum calendar notes, the lead character goes to a theater where Bert French and Alice Eyes are performing their famous vampire dance. As one newspaper wrote, quote, "gliding out from the threshold of the forest trees, the lithe form of the title character allures, recoils, challenges, only repeatedly to repulse her artist victim," end quote. The New York Clipper told readers that the film depicted a, quote, "woman, youthful and voluptuous, tempting the man, and his final capitulation and death," end quote. The dance was, quote, taken from Kipling's poem. While The Vampire appended a happy ending, it received complaints in Atlanta for being too provocative. Nevertheless, The film proved popular enough that Kalem produced a follow-up entitled The Dance of Death. That same year, the two-reel German film Hiawatha, Colonia, 1913, starred Joe Biller and Hild Hadges. It also featured a vampire dance. Here was a tale of a love triangle and a woman's desire for revenge. Its dancers' movements were, quote, bewitching, sensuous, and beguiling, end quote. At the film's climax, the seething dancer kisses her partner tightly before her, quote, predator teeth dig into his throat, allowing her vengeance and his destiny to be fulfilled. Her partner dies. Ads promised that this, quote, sensational film would keep audiences, quote, in breathtaking suspense until the last scene. Far more enduring would be the vampire dance that appears in episode 2 of Louis Filaud's serial Les Vampires, 1915-16. Marfa Kuteloff, played by Stasia Napierkowska, costumes as a vampire bat for her ballet, flying down to the stage and outstretching her wings before approaching a sleeping woman. Napierkowska's dance remains forever incomplete, though, because she collapses, having been poisoned by the leader of a criminal gang. Here is an inversion of prior vampire dances, given that the vampire dies and the victim survives. Given the serial's success upon its original release and its continued fame and accessibility, Napierkowska's vampire dance remains the most famous, and I will show some of it right now. Though relegated largely to the land of forgotten lore, the vampire dance did not completely vanish. On occasion, it continues to flicker on the wall. Witness Roman Polanski's Dance of the Vampires, 1967, as well as Guy Maddin's film Dracula, Pages from a Virgin's Diary. A century after Loie Fuller, the undead shades and shadows continue to open their wings and dance, with greater verve than the bleeding hearts and dry bones of the churchyard. And why should they not? They are undead, a condition that invites celebration and gambol, a condition that invites them and us to drink, and of course to dance, to keep dancing through the centuries to come.